welcome to another episode of Pink Talks, a conversation about all things feminism. My name is Margarida Martins.
And I'm Maria Luís Fernandes, and we are your co hosts for today.
Yes, in this Pink Talks, we will be discussing men, masculinity, and feminism, how they relate to each other in common, and how we can make sure that men, masculinity, and feminism interplay to find productive solutions.
Yes, but we'll develop more about that in a little bit. For now, we would like to introduce you our two guest speakers who will help us explore today's topic, Dr. Giti Chandra and Emilio Eitusa.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. So I'll start with Dr. Giti Chandra, who is a
Hi.
research specialist with the Gender Equality Studies and Training Program under the auspices of UNESCO in Reykjavik, teaches at the University of Iceland, and has been associate professor at St. Stephen's College, Delhi. She has taught in and been a fellow at Rutgers University, New Jersey, from where she did her doctoral work on women's narratives of violence. She's an author and has served as chairperson of the College Complaints Committee Against Sexual Harassment in St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and as the external expert on the Sexual Harassment Complaints Committee at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, amongst many other things. Dr. Chandra, welcome. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
accepting our invitation. Would you like to add or mention anything else about yourself or your work right now?
God, no, I think that's quite more than enough.
Well, great. Welcome, Dr.
Thank
Chandra.
you. It's great to be here.
Emilio Toussaint is a Mexican psychologist, finishing his master's degree in cultural and social psychology with a thesis about sexual education and consent in Mexican young men. He has been working in projects related to social justice for the past 12 years and has been working with men and masculinity studies as a high school teacher and a member of a new masculinities group for the past 6 years. Currently starting a second master's in clinical and health psychology, and is the founder, content creator, and coordinator of the Less Machos, More Apapachos project. So nice to have you here, Emilio. Thank you for taking on our invitation. Anything you'd like to mention or add to this brief description?
Just that last Thursday I finally graduate with my thesis defense. So
So good.
that's
Congratulations!
Congratulations.
So you're a master now.
Well
Well,
done.
now I'm a master. Finally, I can say it.
Well, that's great. With congratulations to Emilio, we would just like to let our audience know that if you're watching us live, you can leave your questions in the discussion box that you can see in the right of the screen. And if you want to engage with us and our guests, maybe leave questions, comment on something that has been said, feel free to let us know in the comment box.
All right, so for the topic of today, a brief introduction. Feminism is often interpreted as solely a women's issue, a women's cause, but in order to achieve true equality, this fight must include men. And this means that men must fight for feminism and equality too, but as well reflecting and taking action on the consequences that the lack of equality brings on men. Masculinity and its social representations bring up important questions about how we socialize men and boys and what it means to embody the quality of being manly. As such, feminism has to grapple with the issue of how to better include men and their own structural struggles in the movement.
Yes. So in today's episode, we will explore the concept of masculinity, its definition and evolution through a gender studies lens, and analyze traditional masculinity from a feminist perspective, with a focus on how it affects boys and men and their full diversity. We will also talk about working with men to address the negative impacts that the patriarchy has on their lives and all of our lives. So maybe we would start a little bit speaking about your own experience and projects. So maybe Dr. Chandra, the Gender Equality Studies and Training Program is a UNESCO program that has been going on for 12 years now. And its mission is to be a multidisciplinary approach to promoting gender equality and social justice in low income conflict and post-conflict countries,
Mhm.
as you probably know well, even better than myself. Could you maybe please tell us a little bit about your work in the program and your experience relating to the promotion of gender equality in general?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the guest program a few years ago, and I think what I love about it the most is that we see ourselves as facilitating learning. I mean, we're sitting here up here in, in a Nordic country that is known for its gender equality, even though there's a lot of work still to be done and everyone's doing it. And in many ways, for us to bring people from conflict, post-conflict states, from middle to low income countries, and to bring them here, there is, yeah, I mean, we don't see ourselves as telling people how they can improve things. We see ourselves as as providing a platform for people to learn from each other. And so that actually is what I find really exciting about this program. It's true that we put together a syllabus that has, goes from theories and concepts to gender and development, labor and migration, gender violence and security, gender and climate change and the environment, and so on. We encourage them to have a final assignment that they can take back to their workplaces and put into motion, and so on. So it's a very practical, hands-on kind of program, set in Reykjavik. And so we get faculty from everywhere as well, so that our faculty sort of is a good representation of the demographics of our students, or our fellows, as we call them. So we get people from a lot of countries in over Africa. We get people from Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan. We get people from South Asia, Southeast Asia. We get people from the Balkans. We get people from, so we try and have a faculty that also mirrors the sort of diversity of our fellows. And so I think that in the classroom, what is really exciting is to see people learn from each other. What works in Kenya? How did you manage to do this in Malawi? What are the fisheries doing in Lake Tanganyika? How can women from Afghanistan learn from women in Bangladesh? And so it's, yeah, I mean, well, that's the really exciting part. And it is usually a good mix of men and women, but as you've pointed out, feminism is seen as a women's thing. And I often joke that when I teach courses at the University of Iceland, if it has the word gender in it, men don't take it because men are not a gender, apparently. Only women are a gender. So we often have more women than we have men. But yeah, so that's some of the work that we do here, which I find just really rewarding. I often actually sit in on classes that other people are taking, just to be able to soak it in. I think it's also important that it's set in Reykjavik, so that in terms of gender and environment, I think our fellows get a really good sense of how environmental work is important. What are the climate changes happening? What is Iceland doing about it? I think for a lot of people, it's the first time, for a lot of women, it's the first time that they are in a space where they can be absolutely safe.
Oh, wow.
So it's not absolutely safe in the sense that, of course, there is, sexual violence and crime in that sense, but you can pretty much walk the streets at any time of day or night without danger of being abducted or mugged or raped or molested. And, you can go in and out of places pretty much freely.
Yeah.
And that is often a new experience for people. And I think that growing up in India, I just took it for granted that a woman always walked in fear. I mean, more fear, less fear. Some places made you more afraid, some places you were more, at ease, but always, whether it was in the buses in broad daylight, or, whether it was late at night in a spot that you didn't want to be in, whether it was driving alone, as I did all my adult life in Delhi, Right, and I see what a difference it makes to, to simply exist, even if it's only for 4 or 5 months, in a place where you can go out day or night, whenever you want, wherever you want, and you're more or less safe.
Oh, that's truly, truly inspiring to hear. It sounds like a very impactful program and very well thought as well, because
Yeah.
well, I think maybe a generic statement to make, but it's very much true that diversity does bring out the best in people
Hmm.
and usually the best results as well. So it's great to hear that you try to match the diversity of your fellows and that you can give such an
Yes,
opportunity to so many different people.
Hmm.
It's so great.
Yeah.
that is truly great. Thank you for your explanation. Emilio, going to you. So I wanted to start with a definition of the Dictionary of Usual Spanish in Mexico.
Yep.
The definition for macho, which is a man who considers the male sex as naturally superior to the female, exalts the characteristics traditionally attributed to men, and tries to impose and dominate women or demonstrate his strength, virility, etc. before women or other men. So, taking this brief description, can you tell us about your project, Less Machos, More Papachos?
Yeah.
And talking about the project, elaborate a bit on your work on sexual education and consent and on your work with men and masculinity studies in general.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to explain. I'll try to be brief. Well, as you mentioned, the project is called Les Machos More Papachos because we want to address that conception, no, of some men thinking unconsciously or unconsciously, because I don't really think it's always conscious. I think we are built in a tough way that prevents us from being empathic a lot of times, no. So we are trying to address that, and more apapachos comes from Nahuatl, is the the well, it's still spoken in Mexico, and it used to be the main language for the Aztec Empire, Nahuatl, and it remained, no, and it means hugs to the heart, no. So we want to address that. We think that compassion and empathy are the ways to address men, no, because they are totally contradictory to hegemonic masculinity, and I believe in tenderness. I believe in radical tenderness for sure, no. So a bit about how it was born. Well, in I come from Mexico, no, and Latin America is a as India. What based on what you were saying, Sandra, it's violent for women. It's not a safe space to walk. No, it's not a safe space to be, and that shouldn't happen. And I felt the same when I came to do this master in Europe when I arrived in Warsaw and I could walk, like, because Mexico and Colombia and other countries also have wars, drug wars, no, so the violence peaks even more, and everyone feels unsafe, no, especially women, because then organized crime takes over, and human trafficking, which means especially sexual trafficking, no? So it's a really, really brutal society where violence is normalized, and for a man to normalize violence, it's even more risky because of our socialization, no, I believe, no. So, well, these projects comes from a place where there's a lot of rage, no, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of anger, and it's understandable, but from my privileged position of being a man, I cannot engage in that rage, because I know if you have seen this Netflix thing called Nanette. It's a stand up,
Oh
and
yes, I
and
love
I
that
love,
one.
yeah, and I love how she mentions that we cannot organize collectively through anger, no, because that has the results, historical results, no. And when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is really important, no, and I need to make it into my position, no, and to share it in my position, because men feel angry at feminists right now, and feminists feel angry at men, no. So we have this situation that for me is like, a ver, we need to learn how to have conversations, and healthy conversations, no. So it's born from that. I used to work in a feminist space in Mexico for like 5 6 years, which was great. But then I started realizing that I started also feeling guilty and paralyzed. And I was always pointed out as privileged and white Mexican and with university education. No? So I felt like trapped. And I was like, a ver, is this the best way to work with men? Or how can I work with men as a man? No? I came to the master. The master gave me perspective, no? Because I also was in masculinity groups in Mexico, and direct confrontation was the most common tool, which in research is the worst tool to work with men, no? So I was like, what? Like, are we doing something crazy? What's happening, no? And through the thesis that where I heard men, Mexican men from all over the republic, the sample is huge, 1,845 men, no? I was like, okay, so feminism is really nice. Like the results are that it actually reduces sexual coercion and reduces benevolent sexism. Great, perfect, no? But it also shows that depends on how it's framed, how it's perceived. And my sample, it's like porn was the main sex education resource for men. 96% of men talked about it like a sex education resource, mention it as sex education. Feminist only 45%. Half of men perceive it as a sex education resource. That's not a good sign, no? So only half of the sample got impacted, possibly that by feminism, and the other sample didn't even touch it. So that is why it's born, because I want to generate conversation, and a conversation that has three characteristics: non-violent, compassionate, and accepting each other's history, and of course, like Iti Chandra said, intersectional.
Well, that is great to hear. It sounds like extremely important work, and it actually touches on a topic we would like to bring to our table, which regards obviously the relation of men and carving out a space for men, speaking in very broad terms, obviously. In feminism, I mean, if we consider the progress of feminism, again, also very broadly, in the framing of waves and and its relationship with what was always an outsider group, right? The men. We've had during the second wave more of an exclusionary approach of we need safe spaces. We cannot have this sort of elite oppressing group in our spaces because we want to be free and want to discuss our issues. So we cannot have you here. We had this switch, this sort of pivotal moment a while back, switching to universalism, to bring up discourse about, well, we need to include men, we need to talk about men's issues, we need to bring them forth. And that also raised some questions about, again, bringing this sort of already elite, already oppressive group to the front of a movement that was trying to deal with gender issues. And more recently, maybe an intersectional approach tries to balance this sort of exclusion and inclusion of men in feminism, including their issues, including their structural challenges, but also asking men to, stand up for feminism and for feminism issues and for women, and to say, from my own stance of privilege, I'm trying to make things more equal. Taking this into account, and well, of course, whether you agree or disagree with this assessment, how do you think men can or should relate to feminism, and how should their space be carved out in their in the movement? I'm asking this to both of you, so maybe Dr. Chandra, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree with everything you're saying, and I think that, one of the ways in which I try to repackage feminism for people who are coming to it, fresh, young men and women who are coming to it not for the first time, but seriously for the first time, is to say, that feminism is about equality. that, when we talk about the classes or the races or any other sort of category, we understand that no one person will be equal until all people are equal. We understand this. We see this in terms of class, right? We see this in terms of money and financial economic inequality. We see it in terms of racial inequality. But I think that people are slow to see this in terms of gender equality, that nobody is equal, not even men, until everyone is equal, and that feminism calls for an equality for everyone. And so I think that for when you explain to people what patriarchy is, then it's always good to lay the emphasis on the fact that, of course, it discriminates against women, but it also entraps men. Patriarchy is as bad for men as it is for women. It gives them power, sure, but it takes away a great deal. They are as straitjacketed by patriarchy. You are deprived of so many things. You cannot cry. You cannot show hugs to the heart. You cannot show empathy and compassion and love. You cannot. There's an entire half of your psyche or personality that you are asked to shut away, because that's effeminate, or that's not a man, or that's not macho, and you're asked to cut half of yourself and put it away. And then this leads to all kinds of things. I mean, if a man is sexually molested, then there is so much shame and so much stigma attached to it by the patriarchal structure, because it's not manly to be sexually molested. And it makes it that much harder for men to talk about you know uh, their own vulnerability. I mean, it's hard enough for women, but everyone knows that women are molested. But there is so much about the patriarchy that harms men, and people tend not to see it, because partly, as Emilio said, this is how you grow up. You're conditioned into never questioning that this is what boys must do, this is what girls must do. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that it's not just that men have to stand up and fight for women. Men have to stand up and fight for equality. In the same way that women have to stand up and fight for equality, and that trans people and non-binary people and people of all genders. Feminism is about equality. It's not necessarily only about equality for women. So yeah. I mean, you have to stop me because I just keep.
No, I mean, we're here
Go, go,
to
go,
listen
go.
to you. We're here to listen to all the wonderful things you have to say. So feel free to speak up. But then that's a lovely answer, and maybe yeah, maybe we can get more men to take your gender classes, and that would
I hope
that
so.
would, that would help a little bit,
Yes.
because male is also a gender. So
Yes, it's
Yeah,
it's
Totally.
not a
exactly.
default. It's not a
so
default state of existence. It's
um,
also a gender.
Yeah.
Yes, we are
But
going to.
most
we
men don't believe gender is like is social constructed, and I've seen it
Right.
so much.
We're
And
going to
that's
get into that. We're
okay.
going to
Let's
get
go
into that.
there.
Yeah, we have some questions for you on that. Emilia, would you like to talk about this previous topic?
No, I think what Chandra said was great. Like I agree that we have to fight for equality. Uh, and I might be going on. Like I think she used the contrast or patriarchy, which I believe is super useful in some kind of context. But working with men that are afraid of feminism, I think this word is super tricky and triggering. No, because and I think it's maybe a misconception, because I believe that patriarchy comes this word of the patriarch, no, like the guy that was, it usually was a guy, no, that was on top, and this triangle of verticality with the white male guy on top, no. And and I would say also for myself, sometimes when I hear it, I feel like, damn, was there like a conspiracy where all guys just wanted to take over, or what happened, no? And it makes me feel guilty sometimes, but I've been working on it. Right now I feel at peace, no, but at some point I didn't know what to do. And in some groups, they also told me the thing is you know your social debt as a man, no? And I consider that a bit of extremist because I didn't decide to be a man. No? I didn't decide to live this privilege, and now I don't know how is it to repay it, no? And nobody tells me how either. And maybe what Chandra is saying is the how. Everyone fighting for equality, no? From their own position and respecting each other's way of fighting, no? Because, for example, I'm a Zapatist believer. I love Zapatist movement in southern Mexico with the indigenous movement, and they say that they want to build a world where all the worlds are possible, no? So I want to live in a gender project where all projects are possible, no? Where working with men can be strategic, no? And not only politically correct. And this was one of my thesis discussions, no? And we were engaged because I was like, the problem is that in my survey, I used, do you identify, no? To collect the sample. The concept of identity, the conservative groups in general, from all the struggles you want, see it as something super threatening, no? And in Mexico, gender identity is perceived like a conspiracy, no? That the UN is coming to traditional family, and you're like, okay, a ver, are we understanding or not? And what is happening that we need to re-educate this concept in a strategic way and not just frontal. You have to hear because this is the truth, no? So so yeah, I think that is how I would fight for equality, you know. And just complementing of what Chandra was saying, yeah, totally. Guys that are sexually molested are super shamed. But I want to implement that my study also shows that guys don't know how to say no and feel obliged, and sometimes they're victims of abuse and they don't know it, no?
Mhm.
And we don't even know
Just
it
like
because
women.
we have to have sex, and if we don't, sometimes depending of how processed with herself is, they get like, then you don't like, then I'm the problem. And it's like, no, wait, I am the problem, believe me, I'm not programmed to have sex,
Yeah,
you know. So it's like how to make these nice discussions that would help
yeah,
us both change, no, into a healthy way of
yeah.
relating.
I mean, I think it's really interesting what you say that, because since you're working on ideas of consent, you know this. It's the idea that a man should always be ready to have sex, and that the more sex a man has, the more a man he is. And this is also patriarchy, right? This is also a patriarchal construct of masculinity, and it doesn't do a great deal for men either. I mean, I'm looking at these incel, groups
Yeah.
in America, and I think that they're only a really extreme version of what toxic masculinity really is, right? In a sense that not having sex is this terrible, shameful thing, and then it's just one step from there to say, why isn't she giving me sex? She owes it to me. And then from there, it's another step to go out and physically brutalize a woman because she's not going to
Yes.
give you sex.
Yes.
So you
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
make an object of yourself while you're objectifying other people as well. You're also objectifying
Yeah.
yourself as this sexual machine.
Yes, indeed.
Totally.
And that's definitely one of the reasons that, well, that would be another whole episode, but that sexual violence conversation
Yep.
must include men as well, not only
Yeah.
just women protecting
Yeah.
themselves.
I kind of
For
also
sure.
wanted to say to this question of privilege, I
For
mean,
sure.
yeah, I mean, for instance, I'm an extremely privileged person where I come from in India, right? We know that caste is still a thing, even though it shouldn't be, and it was abolished, centuries ago. Nevertheless, it still functions as these things do. And as Emilio says, I didn't ask to be born into, where I was, into an upper middle class family, into an upper caste, into all of that. And I think that a lot of the ways um, in which younger women, bringing caste into the issue, bringing race into the issue, a lot of the ways in which people like me, who are people of privilege, uh, are made uncomfortable is a good thing. It's good to be made uncomfortable. It's good to ask the question that you're asking, Emilio, which is that how should I do this? Um, I didn't ask for it, but I benefit from it. I didn't ask to be born upper caste, but I benefit from it. A man didn't ask to be born a man, but every man benefits from patriarchy. White men didn't ask for it, but they benefit from race structures. So we're not all of us entirely innocent. We can't stop benefiting from it because that's the way the world works. And I think, as you've shown, Amelia, it's what you do with your privilege.
No, definitely.
Exactly.
And I definitely thought when Emily mentioned it, and now that you mentioned it as well, Dr. Chandra, I think that's definitely the main point, right? I think I even told this to a friend the other day at a certain point that sure, you can stay at home and think, oh, I have so much privilege because of this or that, but that doesn't help change something for the
Mhm,
people that might not have it. That doesn't help.
mhm,
And this doesn't mean that you have to be a huge activist and have,
mhm,
I don't know, maybe a huge platform or something like that, but just being aware in your life and trying to have the conversation, the hard conversations, and being self-aware and, you know,
Mhm.
trying to work with yourself where you have to, and maybe trying to be, then again, empathic and
Yes,
mhm.
having
compassionate
empathy.
towards people that
Yep.
might need some help getting there. I think that's definitely maybe the, I don't want to say the right approach, but maybe the more productive approach
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
the
towards
starting point, at least. Having
Yeah,
towards
empathy and
feeling
respect is a
having
good starting point
feeling
absolutely.
privileged. Yes.
in
Yeah.
these discussions. Differences interplay, and some
Yeah.
people are more privileged than others. I'd like to go back to both of you mentioned, Dr. Chandra mentioned the term feminism, Emilio mentioned patriarchy, like what's in the word, that there's so much resistance to these words from, well, in this case, men specifically, it's what we're talking about. I face that constantly with the men in my life. And I'd like to ask you, well, first, Dr. Chandra, about feminist identified men. So, although being a feminist includes supporting egalitarian gender roles, some men may be uncomfortable with the terms implied opposition to an institutional system that grants men's positions of powers, especially when they stand to benefit in the aggregate from maintaining the status quo, the patriarchal
Mhm,
status quo.
mhm,
But at the same time, like you said, these patriarchal structures and rigid norms of masculinity hurt men and boys by repressing and oppressing them. And how can boys and men, I guess, my question is, how can they reconcile these two aspects of the patriarchy that on one hand grants them privileges that maybe they want to keep, and on the other harms them more than anything else in the world, even if they
yeah,
blame other things for that, namely women. And
yeah,
we
yeah,
know it's the patriarchy. How can they
yeah.
reconcile that dichotomy?
I think one of the ways to explain this, I don't know if it works for everyone, but it is to say that there's not a finite amount of goodness in the world. It's not as if you take 90% of the of the goodness, and I'll have only 10. You have to give me some of yours. You'll be left with less happiness if I take away some of yours. That's not how it works. And I think that for those men who feel that they will have to give up power in order to give women power, I think it's important to sort of ask, what kind of power are you giving up, and why do you want to keep that power? It's, for instance, if uh, there's been a lot of this talk, especially in the context of COVID, how men have actually started doing things around the house
Wow.
because they're stuck at home. So suddenly men are cooking, men are baking, men are finding their inner domesticity and so on. And they're sort of, and you'll have all of these things where I help out my wife with her chores. And so then there's other people who say, look, the point is not for you to help her because it's not her primary duty, right? And so if you change the way you think about it, it's not that, oh, I'm helping my wife. It's her responsibility to look after the children or clean the house. But I'm such a good guy, I'm helping her. It's to say, what is my duty? Is it not also my, is it not also my house? Are these not also my children? To change that. And so, to ask what is the power that you want to keep? And I think that, I mean, there are men who will say, well, I want to be able to beat women. I want to be able to have sex whenever I want. I want to never have to do the housework. I want to never have women in the boardroom. Sure. I'm not sure that I can talk to those men, you know, but for the rest of them, you're like, well, what does your power mean to you? And why do you want to keep it? And if it means that I don't want women in the office, then you have to ask them to think about that. If it means that I don't want to have to cook, then you have to ask them about that. If it means that I don't want to have to look after my children, I think that if you interrogate these little, it seems like small things, but if you break it down, then what is this loss of power that men fear? What does
Yes.
it boil down to? Right? And in many ways, it's the things that they will gain are so much more worth having. If you gain the freedom to show your emotions, if you gain quality time with your kids, uh, if you gain the benefit of having women in your boardroom who are going to bring whatever they can to the boardroom, then yeah, then I think that it's I think just in the abstract to say that we will suffer if feminists take over the world is, it's not. If you break it down, you can see what it actually means. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's very interesting. And it also has to do, I think, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more down the road, but it also brings up this idea of the connection between the society and the individual. Because I figure that a lot of times when you're trying to maybe get someone to question, why do I feel like I'm losing something? Why do I feel that maybe I feel like I'm having a bit of a power struggle here if a woman is now president of the board?
Hmm. Hmm.
um, it's interesting because for a lot of people it feels like it's not a big issue. It's just this thing that is happening here, this small thing. But and conversely, when we think about big social phenomena, it seems like how can this ever have individual implications?
Hmm.
And it's it's very interesting to think how we can reconcile these two things and make sure that people understand that when you have an individual action or thought or belief that is also in connection with the social system and with the social norms, and just maybe make sure that people consider those as well, that they think about them as well when we're trying to deal with these issues. But maybe towards Emilio, in connection to this topic, it's also important to discuss maybe how men themselves organize to talk about the harmful consequences and issues raised by gender roles and expectations. How do men talk to each other?
Yeah.
Can feminism answer these concerns? You think should men talk more to each other about how to embrace feminism within, let's say, a social identity that still makes sense to their masculine ideals, and on the other on the other side of the coin, how maybe can we avoid the perils of leaning towards movements that want to address the structural oppression of men without stopping or without stopping the support towards a patriarchal system or towards a system that is still affecting everyone else.
Yeah. Well,
It's
I
a, it's,
want
it's a big
to.
question.
Yeah.
We're not
Okay. I want to give my
we're not
basic understanding and my personal understanding
yeah, of course, that's
of how
definitely what
feminism
we're here to
relates to
discuss.
men and which type of men.
Mm,
Because there's no men. Like there's no feminism individual. There's no masculinism individual either, because I've dived into the different kinds of things that men are doing. And there's from the anti-feminist men to the also extreme feminist men.
Of course.
You know, like
Men,
there's
like
a whole
all other
spectrum.
social groups, are not a monolith, of course.
Exactly.
Really?
That's
Entonces,
definitely a disclaimer to
yeah, yeah,
make.
but
Yes.
but there's a perception, and yeah, maybe everyone is an average dude. Mainly men, for sure, are an average dude, and maybe that's the population we need to address. No, the average dude. But for sure, I can also see, like for me, the average dude is the normal, not too hegemonic masculinity, because we have globalization, because we have certain sexual education, we have social media, we have series that are way more gender equal, no, and show you men in position of power, women in position of power, gender fluid, everything. Not that they're the most consumption, but they are, and now we have references, no, that we didn't have before, and that's for me, that's a bit of an improvement, no. But the average dude for me feels unsafe and confused. Like he doesn't know where he's moving. He feels like, okay, gender relationship are changing, what is happening? Like, oh, I cannot make a comment on a girl's physique, but why? No. Oh yeah, but like for example, I've been working in social projects a lot, and my grandfather is indigenous, no, so he's used to, we give him like, everyone serves the food, no, the woman serve the food, the woman clean the food, and the guys just stay there to talk, no. And there was one time when I started reading about these and learning, I was like, okay, I'm gonna put my plate and wash it after the lunch. Is normal, no? Everyone does their things. It's not super important, no? So I went there, and my father was like, "What are you doing?" Like, well, I'm gonna put the plate, wash it, like everyone else is doing, no? Because there was the only men there were me and my grandpa, no? And he was like, "No, they are the ones that do it." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe to you, but not to me, no? And we are different generations, no?" And he was like, "Yeah, but you're in my house, no?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm also your guest, no?" So, so in the end, there was a bit of a, let me like let me do this because I'm seeing changes, and let me try to talk to you. But for sure, there's this traditional masculinity men that have a trait that homogenic masculinity has, which is avoidance of femininity, no?
Mm.
So everything related to femininity is a void, and for me, this is the key, no? Because for me, power is not about getting more women on top; is about getting more femininity on top. Like, because then some women get into position of power, but they're extremely masculine, no? And we have various examples of them in history, no? So we're like, okay, what if we value femininity more? Caretaking is super important. Like, it's like, and now psychology, mental health, COVID. If COVID hasn't teaching us something, is that femininity is key, a key pedestal, a healthy femininity as well as a healthy masculinity. Both of them can be healthy, no? But we have to strive, no? And we have
Of
to educate
course.
them in that way. If we say your masculinity is evil and horrible, oh, but what do you mean? So I'm a man and I'm bad? Like the comments I've heard from these incel groups, no, like Iti Chandra was saying, because the incel groups are part of this movement that in Spanish-speaking countries, especially in Mexico, Argentina, they're called New Masculinismo, no? And they are way bigger than new masculinity groups. They have way more audience. Like, and I was like wondering why, and why are so many men? And they're making research, and sometimes they have points. Sometimes they have certain points, and they are like, "Hey, why is it in divorce the woman get more chances to get the kid? Why?" And they put the law, and yeah, it's there, no? And I'm like, oof, this makes me feel confused because it puts my political identity into crisis, no? And I'm like, okay, let's look at it. And I'm like, okay, this is also patriarchy, like Edith Chandra is saying, because we believe that men not be caretakers, no? No, everyone should be caretaker. That's the thing. Everybody. That would be one of the main classes in school, no? Emotional intelligence. for everyone, por favor, no? So, I do believe that the way to address would be femininity is awesome, like being sensitive,
Yes.
amazing, emotionality, empathic. I don't know. Those are some of the
Yes, that's
No,
true. And
that
especially I
definitely.
would say that traits associated with femininity and masculinity, they're human traits. They're not, you're not born more empathic than other people. That's something you're socialized into, and it's a
hmm
choice. And
hmm
it's true. I see some claims from, men's rights activists and such anti-feminist male groups. Their claims, higher male suicide rates and depression and less likely of getting custody of child. That's true, but that's a direct consequence of the patriarchy, and it's a bit.
Yes.
For me, it's very frustrating to see that they don't they don't go that way. And I would like to ask you in that, let's segue to that, Emilio. Traditional masculinity, like it's upheld by older generation, or even by new conservative generations, and is defined by a number of demonstrative traits like prioritization of male friendships, avoidance of anything feminine, like you said.
hmm
Sometimes even things more dark, like objectification of women, and and based on your experience, what would you think is the perception of feminist men who identify as feminists? Do you feel that the threat that a feminist identity can pose to their perceived masculinity is the main reason that many boys and men feel that they don't want to identify as feminist? And do you think feminist self-identification is actually in direct opposition to this traditional masculinity and its expectations? And I guess in connection to this, your project tries to address.
Well, you're
Um, did it cut?
yes, a little bit, but it's
Okay,
okay.
I'll pick up. Yeah, yeah. Just the final question was that in connection to this and to the rise in anti-feminist groups that you deal with, could you tell us what these groups look like? What actions do they promote, and how do you try to approach them, people in these groups?
Okay. So first, I'll talk about this issue of the feminist identity for men that you were mentioning, Margarita, and I think that feminist identity in men is prohibited in both extremes, in extreme feminism and in extreme machism. It's prohibited, no? Because, for example, in the new masculinity groups I used to work in Mexico, if you say you're a feminist man, you're a macho man because you're using privilege to flirt with women, no? And to convince, to use feminine to flirt, to seduce, blah blah blah. And I think for sure some men do it, but others don't, no? And that generates a more tension in this identity and a more concept of separation, no? That men cannot be feminist. And from my point of view, everyone should be feminist. The posture, like Iti Chandra is to build equality, to struggle towards it, no? Everyone. So, but some groups say no, men cannot be, no, because they're taking away an identity that should only be addressed for women. That's on one side, no. I don't know. We should discuss about it. I think it would be nice to discuss about it in a non-violent way, no. Again, and then the
Ideally,
other, ideally, we can. I'm sure we can. Like it's just learning to breathe, learning to have the difficult conversations that Maria Luis was saying. Like I love that term, like the hard conversations, the difficult conversations, not totally, and to have them in a violent way. To say if I'm feeling personal because I have a personal history, because I've been triggered so much, and I'm like, a ver, Emilio, are you getting triggered because you feel attacked, or they are attacking your group, or they're attacking an idea? A ver, hear it first and then don't attack a group or a person, attack an idea, try it, like you can do it,
Mhm.
but it's a tough one, no? And regarding
Yes,
again,
definitely.
going
Yeah.
back to the feminism, the other part, these groups that you want me to talk about, no, perceive feminist men as weak souled to women that only want feminine approval, no. So we see these two dichotomies, and none of them help at all, no. And I think dichotomy is a problem by itself, not dichotomizing the world, no. So 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 yeah, I'm like, and what do they talk about, no? Well, they talk about this interesting things, no, that you mentioned, like suicide prevention. That yesterday or the day before yesterday, it was really engaging and it was nice, no. But they also talk about this divorce, and they also talk about hate speech towards men, no. When women say all men are potential rapists, no, they say this is hate speech. I think it's worth to talk about it, because that is reinforcing my identity. Like, I read a book that said that actually that discourse is reinforcing men's perpetrator identity, not helping them, no?
Mm.
No matter who says it, no?
Yeah, and I
And
think that maybe, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is quite interesting that yourself, as a scholar of psychology, many times these sort of structural issues are hard to fight precisely because they're intertwined with people's identity. So when we want to discuss them, it's hard for people to face themselves because they have to maybe face the fact that their identity might not be so great, or they might have to change. There might be some work involved. So then it becomes quite hard because, of course, like you said, then it becomes not about discussing an idea, or maybe even a social phenomenon that might be affecting me, but it becomes discussing me. And you're
Mm-hmm.
saying that
yeah,
I'm wrong, and you're saying that I'm bad
Yeah.
and evil. And, or if you're saying that this person that I identify with, so if I'm a man, this person is also a man, if he's doing something wrong, then I might be doing something wrong as well. And that makes yeah, I think that also brings that sort of an interesting element when we're trying to talk with each other. And it, as you described perfectly and very insightfully, when men are talking with each other, because of course it's a completely different conversation when we're talking about men that have traditional masculine a traditional masculine identity. It becomes maybe a bit of a closed or more closed circle, as you would when people around you are like yourself. And then, yeah, then we're trying to discuss identity, and definitely makes it easier to maybe slip into this sort of not so productive discourse. And that's definitely something that we have to take into account when we're trying to discuss feminism with men, which is what we're trying to do. So maybe I would direct now to Dr. Chandra first, but maybe if you want to chime in a little later, Emily, feel free. But I wanted to bring, as we're closing in on the hour, I wanted to bring a question of maybe openness and hopefully optimism. What do you think is the future of masculinity? So is masculinity maybe toxic in and of itself, or do you think there's a path to reconcile certain characteristics without bringing on the harmful consequences as well for men themselves, and also what it brings for society and everyone else? Is it possible to maybe find a way to empower men through masculinity, very much so, like we see very recently women feeling empowered, and as we discussed here, women feeling empowered through femininity, or people embracing more feminine characteristics as a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some people talk about positive masculinity, or soft masculinity. They call it a lot of things. So what would you like to see in the discussion going forward?
Yeah. That's a really big question. I'm not sure I have an answer to it, but
I
I,
mean, we're
yeah,
here to ask big questions, and you're just here to give the insight that you can.
yeah.
We're having a conversation.
Um, so I think first off, I would reiterate what Emilio is saying, which is that it's not men or women we want; it's a certain kind of femininity that you want. Let's bring feminism or the ideals of feminism. Let's call it femininity. Let's call it whatever. Those are the things we want. And I want to go back to one of the things also that you said, Emilio. That it's not just a question of putting women in power in a masculine system. If the system is still capitalist, patriarchal, whatever, power driven, whether you put a man or a woman on top, there are limited benefits, representational and so on and so forth, but mostly it doesn't really help to put a woman in charge of a very male system. What you want to do is change the system from masculine to to feminine, as he points out so wonderfully. So I think that I would want to redefine masculinity so that it didn't mean what it does today, that it can incorporate some of femininity with it, and we can get to a point where we can discard this binary. We can stop seeing it as a binary, that masculinity is not femininity or whatever. As you said, we don't need these words anymore. That would be that would be my goal, right? But in order to get there, I think this is one way to as he says, just redefine it so that it doesn't mean what we think it means anymore. So that maybe 10 years down the line, when people say this is masculinity, they will actually mean a bunch of the good stuff that we want them to mean, right? Instead of what it means right now. But I also see the way in which the whole notion of gender has opened up in the last, I don't know, let's say 15 years, where non-binary people of different sexualities, the notion of genders as being multiple and fluid, of trans people and so on. I mean, I think that this whole this context that has been sort of building up, and of course we know that there are tensions there, we know that there are frictions, especially when it comes to trans women and trans men and so on. But I think that what this whole thing does, this new sort of awareness of gender and sexuality, is that it breaks this up. It's almost, there's so many people who don't care about what masculinity means because they are just non-binary. And just by identifying as non-binary, you're sort of saying, I have no need for these binaries of masculinity and feminine. And I have great hope for this. I really think that this is one way for us to, sort of discard these and look for a common goal of respecting anyone's gender or sexuality or whatever it is. So that's my hope, and I do see hope. I mean, I know that there is so much that is militating against it. There are backlashes, there are right-wing, conservative policies being made around the world. But I see this as something, it's not going to go away. It's not something that you can have a government policy and suppress. The way that the discourse around gender has changed. I mean, for instance, I see both of you put she, her next to your names, and I'm much older and I have to get used to doing that. It wasn't a thing when I was your age. See, that this should be normalized. It shouldn't be taken for granted that I'm a woman. Of course, I'm she or her, right? This should be normalized. And this is not going to go away. It's not something that you can say, well, we are going to ban abortion, so suddenly there's a huge setback to that movement. This is not going to go away. You cannot have a policy against it. And this kind of awareness, and so it's like a consciousness raising, I think, which is worldwide. So that's where a lot of my hope lies. The fact that people can call themselves non-binary, I think, is such a hopeful thing for me, even though I'm very much on the sort of cis feminist, whatever woman thing. Yeah, that's my short answer.
Thank you. That was
Yeah,
very
that was really, yeah,
very
that was
good answer
really.
for all the pressure we put on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, for all the pressure of the question, that was a great answer. Yeah, I would just wanted to add that before we ask the same question to Emilio, that we here in this episode, and all of us in our work and conceptions, we are working on the conception that a singular real masculinity does not exist, has been rejected by sociology and science. It's a gender is presented as the product of relations and behaviors rather than a fixed set of identities and attributes. And yes, I guess I just feel a bit frustrated that it's so difficult to then relate on conversations of gender with people who believe that gender is biological or even divine or something like this. But that is a yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one obstacle to overcome. But Emilio, what would you
Yeah.
see would you like to see in the conversations of masculinity going forward?
Well, I would like to see that there's actually already positive impact. Like most of the studies that study young masculinities say that we actually want affection. We are actually seeking for emotional safety. Like those are the results. And I relate to those results. And I would also like masculinity to have a focus on child trauma. I've uh, I've had so many men, and personally, I'm a victim of child trauma. And by my mother, it could be your mother, it could be your father, it could be anyone. But most men that engage in violence are victim of trauma too. So I would totally also talk about childhood and talk about children and talk about like, and I love what Chandra said about gender fluid, because in Mexico we have these people that the people that don't like feminism, they say that it shouldn't be called feminism, it should be called humanism, which already exists and already has history, blah blah. But then I was thinking, okay, these people that don't want because it's fem, maybe humanism already exists and it's called non-binary. Like actually, what you want, if you don't want to divide, there's already something out there that is performing something that wants to generate a whole spectrum of experience. And I would actually, like, I don't know, maybe it's a joke, but I would actually tell them, oh, that actually exists, join them. Like they're a whole spectrum, they're discovering themselves, breaking standards. Like, what are you doing here, dualizing everything? You want humanism? That's the whole humanism, the whole spectrum of it. Go for it. So yeah, I would like to masculinity in the end, to what you were mentioning, Margarita, to be able to be discussed with the people that we don't agree, with the conservative people, with the actually ones where we are not get data from, or the data provided there in those times demonstrated a lot of violence. So maybe I would like to break those social class, to break those conservative clusters, and talk about it everywhere, not only in academia, on in these spaces.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. The idea of empathy and bringing everyone into the conversation, or let's say bringing the people into the conversation, even if maybe their ideas are not the most correct or the best ones, but to make sure to accommodate everyone in the conversation. And I think that's a good message to maybe end this discussion on. We're kind of reaching the hour, as you can see, for the lighting go for the light going around me. We're gearing towards the end of the episode. Maybe just before we finish, do you have anything that you think was left unsaid, or any main insight that you would like people to get from this episode, Dr. Chandra?
I mean, there's so much left unsaid.
Of
So much
course,
more to
of
say.
course, of course.
But I think that should always be how you leave a conversation. You should always feel that there's so much more that we could say to each other, so much more we could, discuss. And it means to me that there are so many ways in which my mind is open and willing to be changed. When you say that a conversation is over, then you personally are not looking to understand anything anymore. You think you've understood everything, you've got everything. So yeah, I really admire the work that you guys are doing, and I think, as I said, the more people who do it, the better we will all be eventually. So thank you.
Thank you for your presence as well, and for the work that you're doing. It's also extremely important, and it's truly an honor to have you here with us. Emilio, before we finish.
No, I like what Sandra said is perfect. I would just like to say thank you to all of us, and let's keep having this conversation.
Wow.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to both of you, our guests, Dr. Giti Chandra and Emilio Toussaint, for your presence and brilliant insights, and extend that to the audience. Thanks for being here and interested. And I guess hugs to the heart,
Thanks to the heart.
and goodbye.
We'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.